incentive for taking care of forests or their biodiversity or thinking long term. So these problems are all well recognized and they're almost intractable. How do you fix massive problems of forest governance when so many different layers of government are involved, so many different vested interests? And one novel idea came up was the kind of idea of a green economy pilot zone, or a district that could be given a creative license to resolve some of these issues. The model that was put forward was kind of an industrial park in China, where they create a geographic space where all the old bureaucracies and rules don't apply, and there's opportunity to have creativity in policy setting. So we don't know how feasible this idea, but perhaps in Indonesia, some districts could be declared as green economy districts, and all these creative ideas such as land swaps. So for example, if you're a palm oil concession holder and your concession is in a forest area, can that be swapped for an area of degraded land? Mechanisms to bring communities and smallholders in participating in these economies so that they prosper and their rights are respected. Sorting out the many overlapping concessions that undermine security and tenure, having smart systems for resolving land disputes. So if there were places where we could have some policy creativity and get away from all the constraints on that, that might be an interesting way forward rather than trying to do is that better? Across the board reforms at national level. So I think it was a very rich discussion, and I'm trying to summarize it very quickly, but I'll try and stop there, otherwise I have to go into a whole level of detail more.
Thank you very much, Rod, indeed. I think it's interesting to note that when we think of innovation and experimentation, we tend to think of that in business terms, in terms of products, in terms of processes, but of course it's also valid in terms of policies, and we don't have time to rely purely on incrementalism and try everything that doesn't work before we find something that does work. We need to try lots of different things. I'm now actually going to turn to Alex to talk about the energy piece. Alex, now that you've had time to recover from your previous panel.
Yes, thank you. Well, we had a fantastic group, and in fact, all of the work was done by the panelists and then by the discussion leaders. We had 3 discussion leaders, and in fact, our working group broke into 3 sub-working groups to kind of tackle particular issues. So I'm not going to run through all of the points because there were sort of 9 fairly concrete things that were tabled by those 3 groups. But if I tried to summarize them, kind of cluster them into some sort of broader themes, we were looking at smart energy systems, but we soon got into discussions about traffic congestion. In the Indonesian case, we looked at other examples that fell outside sectors, and the context was I think was given to us by a very thoughtful presentation from GBS at Logica, talking about the transition from a kind of product to a service, and the analogy that he gave in the development of a smart system was the mobile phone transition from fixed rate calls 20 years ago to much smarter ways of billing people, and indeed even sort of free ways of making phone calls today. So, you know, a major transition and quite a disruptive one. So we were interested in disruption. We were interested in cross-sector solutions. And we weren't all technical experts in smart grids, so we didn't kind of come up with a blueprint for how to kind of roll out smart grids across Indonesia. The 3 things that I think came out of the subgroups, the need for leadership and collaboration, but in any collaboration that somebody has to take the first step. And so what we were looking for was ways to get that first step taken, followed shortly by other people in a collaboration, but not waiting until everybody was ready to move together. And that is kind of easier to say than to achieve, but there's a sort of fine balance between leadership and collaboration, almost a dance, and that was seen to be very important, not technical. This is about personal leadership and group collaboration rather than kind of gadgets. There was quite a bit of discussion, in fact, about whether all the technology we needed was already in place, and I wouldn't say the group agreed on that, but there were certainly a lot of people in the group who felt that this wasn't really a technical challenge at all, implementing smart systems. It was about transaction costs and individual and social costs and benefits. Another thing was about clarity and transparency, and so we as a working group wanted the objectives of a smart system intervention to be very clear, so that people could really understand the costs and benefits of it. And they wanted a really clear policy framework within which smart systems would be implemented. And we felt that without that sort of clarity and without transparency, for example, on issues of subsidies, which have come up a number of times in other sessions as well, that it would be difficult to get people to take that first step that was identified. And again, easier said than done, but I think in the case of Indonesia at least, we're beginning to see some of that policy clarity emerging from the kind of high-level leadership. We also want to see grassroots leadership as well, from the leadership from the top and from the bottom. I think the third common theme that emerged from these groups was about education and empowerment. And there was a view that, good as we are, we consumers aren't quite sophisticated enough to understand some of the technological promise that is being developed by organizations that are thinking very laterally, and that somehow there needs to be more work done on building demand for smart solutions, and building ways that we as consumers and citizens can actually employ those, that they solve the problems we have, and that we're not sort of left not quite understanding what is the promise that's being offered by companies. So somewhere in there, a kind of stronger education, starting in some cases from quite young, but in other cases kind of going through life. I think, actually, I said three. The fourth thing I think that was very strong was a need for people to be very clear about interoperability. Now, I don't quite know what that means, but I think what it means is that you now, or very soon, will be able to recharge your mobile phone using a single plug, socket, piece of equipment, whatever your mobile phone is. And I think that's got to be a good thing. That's certainly a challenge for me as a mobile phone user, is I never have the right charger available. And if that sort of interoperability can be agreed at the beginning of a technology rather than 20 years after that technology is invented, that has to be a good thing for speeding progress and uptake. So four things in that case.
Interoperability sounds like a fantastic idea, but one has to ask, I mean, there are actually a very limited number of mobile phone manufacturers. Why is it that now, actually, it's not possible to find chargers that work for different ones? It's quite extraordinary in many respects. Could I now turn, please, to Katerina Tomov, who will talk about her group.
I was in the transport and mobility group, and we had really a very good mixture of people in the group, so very lively discussions. We had experts for sea transportation, road transportation, air transportation, logistics providers who can do all of it. We had car manufacturers, NGOs, technological providers, so we already had almost everyone needed for a discussion like this in the group. So the outcome was respectively rich. I'll try to narrow it down to road transportation ideas, because I think that was the area where we had most ideas, and where the ideas also covered, on the one hand, the logistics part, but then on the other hand also the very tangible transportation and mobility part for every citizen. So the five